Well, hi there, and welcome back to start our discussion of food quality and toxins in our food. Remember what I said about going down the rabbit hole? Well, I meant it. This class is also divided into parts A and B, and in each of these classes, we'll talk about 4 sources of toxins in our food. So right away, you can see that we're dealing with a lot of toxins. So let me jump right in with a very simple question. Why do we care about food quality? 2 reasons. We want to maximize the nutrients we get from our food and minimize the total toxic load. So what is total toxic load? Well, it's just what it sounds like. It's the total load of toxins that we get from all food and environmental sources, which on a cumulative basis cause a boatload of health problems for millions of people. For our discussion, we're going to be talking about toxins from food sources. In its 2013 Toxic Release Inventory Report, the Environmental Protection Agency reports that thousands of chemicals are used by industries and businesses in the U.S., that many of these chemicals are toxic, that some release of toxic chemicals into the environment is inevitable, and that these toxic chemicals can be harmful to either human health or the environment or both. So what exactly constitutes some release? Let me tell you. In 2013, more than 4 billion pounds of these chemicals were released into the air, water, and land, or injected underground. Out of sight, out of mind, right? If we can't see it, it must not be there. In addition to this, another 4 billion pounds of production-related waste was disposed of or otherwise released into the environment. That's more than 8 billion pounds of toxins. This is what the EPA calls some release. And this is just from 1 year. Now think about the fact that this happens every year. So we live in a very toxic world. These toxins are in our water supply and in the soil in which we grow the crops that we eat and that we feed to farm animals. And this means that they can contaminate us. In addition, according to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, more than 3,000 ingredients, as the FDA calls them, are currently added to our food. Here are the categories the FDA uses for its ingredients. Now, call me crazy, but when I think of ingredients in a food, I think of things like vanilla, salt, baking soda, flour or eggs, and things like that. I don't typically think of color additives, preservatives, fat replacers, gases, and the other things on this list. But calling these things ingredients makes it plain that they are in the foods that we eat, and we most certainly should know something about them. So what do I mean by the effect of toxins on a cumulative basis? Let's take an example. Conventionally grown produce is grown with the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers. If I eat a conventionally grown apple, should I worry about getting pesticide poisoning? No, of course not. But if I eat all conventionally grown produce and grain products, plus foods that contain other sources of toxins, such as antibiotics and artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives, every day for years, which is what most Americans do, the cumulative effect of this total toxic load on my health would most certainly be detrimental. It's what we do consistently that counts, not what we do every once in a while. Each food containing toxins, even small traces, adds to the pot to create a sort of toxic soup that you're consuming every day. And consuming toxic soup every day leads to a toxic body, which is a painful body, a low-functioning body. In other words, it's a body you don't want. Our bodies are designed to recognize and process natural food substances, not artificial substances. Artificial food additives are treated as foreign invaders by our bodies, and rightly so. Remember our discussion of the gut in our class on inflammation. When our bodies are healthy and we don't habitually eat toxic food, they capture these toxins and eliminate them. But when we inundate our bodies with toxic substances from many sources over a long period, these substances start becoming stored in our bodies and causing a lot of problems for us. Of course. Do you remember what this condition is called? If you said leaky gut syndrome, you're right. Good job. If these toxins are being stored in our bodies, they're getting into our bodies, and they're getting into our bodies through a leaky gut. They're being stored because they are overwhelming our poor liver. And you know what the result of that is. Creation of excess free radicals and oxidation, which will trigger whole body inflammation, which underlies metabolic dysfunction and your pack of interrelated symptoms. So let's talk about 4 common sources of food toxins: chemical pesticides, genetically modified foods, antibiotics, and hormones. Notice that our food animals ingest GMO foods and pesticides through their food, just like we do. And guess where those toxins go? Into the animal's muscle and fat. And that goes into us if we eat animal products, whether it's meat, milk, eggs, yogurt, cheese, cream, or butter. Now, each of these toxins could be a subject unto itself, and my objective is not to make your eyes glaze over, so I'm going to give you just enough of what you need to know about each. Let's start with chemical pesticides. I say chemical pesticides, meaning man-made pesticides, because farmers do use biological compounds such as sulfur and copper on organic foods, which have a natural pesticide effect. Does this picture of the field being sprayed whet your appetite? You might be surprised to know that the EPA admits that most of the foods that we eat are grown with the use of pesticides and that pesticide residues may be in or on these foods. The EPA establishes a tolerance level for each pesticide, which is the amount of pesticide residue allowed to remain in or on each treated food. In 1996, the Food Quality Protection Act was enacted, which charged the EPA with reassessing nearly 10,000 tolerances over 10 years. That means tolerances for nearly 10,000 chemicals. That just blows my mind. At the end of this assessment period in 2006, the EPA revoked 3,200 tolerances and modified another 1,200. Now, while this is good, it also means that the tolerance levels for the revoked or modified tolerances were not safe to some degree to begin with. And this concerns me about tolerance levels in general. 10 years from now, how many current tolerances will be revoked or modified because of some new information? Here's what the state of California's Department of Pesticide Regulation tells farm workers. Quote, "Pesticides can make you sick. Symptoms of pesticide poisoning can be the same as having the flu or other common illnesses. If you get a headache, dizziness, upset stomach, blurred vision, other flu-like symptoms, a rash, or eye pain while working in the field, ask your foreman to take you to the doctor." End quote. Many pesticides used on foods require farm workers to use gloves and long pants and long sleeves, and that tells me something right there. They are picking the food we eat, and they are required to have no direct contact with the food to stay safe. But somehow it's okay for us to eat. No, thank you. Now, while you may associate pesticides with fruits and veggies and grains, as I mentioned, we also ingest them through animal products. Feedlot animals are fed conventionally grown grains that contain pesticide residues, which accumulate in their tissue over time and then are ingested by us. In fact, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says that the main source of exposure to at least one class of pesticide is fatty foods, such as milk, dairy products, and fish. The CDC adds that these pesticides can be transmitted to infants through breast milk and to fetuses in uterine. To me, this is a testament to the cumulative effect of pesticides, tolerance levels notwithstanding. One piece of fruit with some pesticide residue won't do much. But if I eat foods from many sources that have pesticides, fruits, veggies, grains, and now animal products, year after year, tolerances or not, pesticide, and that means poison, is accumulating in my tissue, and this is scary to me. Now let's talk about genetically modified foods. Let's just call them GMO for short. GMO stands for genetically modified organism. So how is a GMO plant created? A scientist takes a gene from one species, makes millions of copies of it, inserts those genes into cells in a petri dish, clones those cells, and then inserts those cells into a plant. The foreign genes may come from bacteria, viruses, insects, animals, or even humans. There are two types of GMO plants: the herbicide-tolerant plant, which can survive being sprayed with herbicides, and the pesticide-producing plant, which produces a toxin that kills bugs that try to eat it by causing their stomachs to explode. So what do you suppose this might do to the lining of our stomachs and guts over time? GMO soy and corn were introduced into the U.S. food supply in 1996. As Jeffrey Smith noted in his very well-researched and illuminating documentary Genetic Roulette, since the mid to late 90s, numerous digestive disorders such as chronic constipation, gastrointestinal infections, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and acid reflux have increased in the U.S. Think about people you know. Who do you know suffering from some kind of chronic digestive disorder? Virtually every client I've ever worked with has had some sort of digestive disorder. Is there a connection between the increase in gut disorders and the introduction and rise in GMO foods? Let me reiterate once again the critical role the gut plays in keeping us healthy by keeping foreign invaders, that is, toxins, from being absorbed. When a foreign invader is detected, the gut, which contains 70% of your immune system, creates an inflammatory response to kill the intruder and keep it from being absorbed into the body. The GMO plant is a new organism. It's not part of the evolutionary process, so our bodies don't recognize the gene sequence of the plant and they treat it like a foreign invader. The result is an inflammatory response in the gut. When you're eating large quantities of GMO food, which most Americans do because GMO foods are ubiquitous in refined foods, your poor gut is going to become chronically inflamed, setting you up for leaky gut syndrome as it loses its ability to keep these invaders out. And you can bet that this will lead to big-time digestive problems and chronic whole body inflammation. If that's not enough for you, in spite of the FDA's public support of GMO foods, its internal records, 44,000 of which were made public in 1998 as part of a lawsuit, document the dangers of GMO foods. These documents link GMOs to increased levels of toxins such as pesticides and heavy metals in our bodies, the appearance of brand new toxins, and loss of nutrients. In addition, both studies and empirical observations on farms have shown the effects of GMO foods on animals. Side effects have included damage to the liver, kidney, spleen, gastrointestinal system, pancreas, and reproductive organs, in addition to premature aging and death. If you want to know more about this, I recommend watching Genetic Roulette, which goes into much greater detail on studies, side effects, and the politics of GMOs. Yes, politics. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. Big business always comes with politics, and GMOs are big business. Here are the 9 GMO crops produced in the U.S. Only 9, but they're in everything, especially the top 4. Soy, corn, cottonseed, which is used to make cottonseed oil, and rapeseed, which is used to make canola oil. Unfortunately, though, it's not just these 9 GMO foods that we need to be concerned with. Take a look at all of the derivative products containing GMO foods. Pretty much any non-organic refined product contains some GMO food. When we start reading food labels, you'll be seeing these derivative products over and over. Fortunately, though, it's very easy to remove GMO foods from your diet. The first way is to buy organic. A food that is certified organic cannot be GMO. Done. For non-organic foods, look for a non-GMO label. Barring these 2 foolproof ways to remove GMO foods from your diet, you can avoid the at-risk ingredients. I've also included a link here to a non-GMO shopping guide that includes a lot of great information, plus a list of non-GMO food brands. Okay, next up, antibiotics, which are given to farm animals to prevent the spread of disease. Would you be surprised to know that up to 80% of the antibiotics sold every year in the U.S. are administered to farm animals and not to humans? And just like pesticides from animal feed, these antibiotics accumulate in the animal's meat and fat and are therefore in all animal products. And then we eat these products. The Washington Post recently reported that the FDA allows dozens of antibiotics to be used in livestock feed, despite its findings that the antibiotics could expose humans to antibiotic-resistant bacteria through the food supply. The CDC reported that resistant bacteria can contaminate animal products, and people who eat these foods can then develop antibiotic-resistant infections, and this is really scary to me. According to the CDC, antibiotic-resistant infections make at least 2 million Americans sick every year and kill about 23,000 of them, in addition to killing even more people who die from other conditions that were complicated by an antibiotic-resistant infection. This is a global problem, not just an American problem, as this quote from the CDC affirms. World health leaders have described antibiotic-resistant microorganisms as nightmare bacteria that pose a catastrophic threat to people in every country in the world. On that cheerful note, let's talk about hormones. Almost all cattle entering a feedlot are given growth and/or sex hormones, that is, anabolic steroids, to promote fast growth and increase milk production. 6 hormones are administered in various combinations, 3 of which are natural and 3 of which are synthetic. You've probably seen labels on milk cartons stating that the milk does not contain RBST, which stands for recombinant bovine somatotropin, or RBGH, which stands for recombinant bovine growth hormone. These 2 synthetic hormones are given to dairy cows to increase milk production. Whether human exposure to these added hormones is dangerous is very controversial. A few years ago, the question was raised as to whether these hormones, through the consumption of meat and dairy products, were contributing to the early onset of puberty. Unfortunately, very little research has been done in this area, partly because it's difficult to separate the effects of the added hormones from the combination of natural hormones, proteins, and other components found in hormone-treated milk and meat. Another concern is that manipulating growth hormones in cows may increase another hormone in humans. That is, insulin-like growth factor, or IGF, which could mimic the effects of human growth hormone in harmful ways. Studies have shown that milk from RBGH-treated cows contains up to 10 times the IGF of other milk. High levels of IGF in humans have been associated with an increased risk of certain cancers. In fact, a 2004 study showed that patients with above average IGF levels had a nearly 50% higher risk of prostate cancer and a 65% higher risk of hormone-dependent premenopausal breast cancer. However, it's important to understand that other things also impact IGF levels, such as smoking, stress, genes, and other diet factors. So what then is the bottom line on added hormones? Have you ever heard the term, when in doubt, leave it out? We know that adding hormones is not necessary to produce nutritious milk. Hormones are added for cost purposes, to increase the milk or meat from each treated cow. Also, one of my most basic tenets of healthy eating is to eat foods in their purest form, for reasons I've already discussed, and for other reasons that I will discuss, and that does not include adding hormones. Okay, you've made it through the first half of food toxins. In the second half, we'll talk about another set of 4 sources of toxins in our food. I wish I could say this won't be disturbing, but I can't. So let me just remind you that knowledge is power, the power to make informed choices, which you cannot possibly do when you don't know these things. Let's review your action items for this week. Continue with your previous action items and continue meeting with your buddies if you're doing My Best Body with a buddy group. These 2 action items should be regular practices from this point on. I won't be adding them to our future lists of action items, but just because you don't see them doesn't mean you should stop doing them. Remember, you're instilling habits. Okay, thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you soon for the second half of Food Toxins as we continue our journey down the rabbit hole. For now, cheers!